Okay, I want to jump in just because I know we have a lot to like cram into. I'm super excited. So first and foremost, thank y'all for just taking the time to tune in to today's webinar. I am Vivianne Castillo. I'm the founder of HmntyCntrd, and we are a professional growth group and community who is interested in doing the personal work required to do our best work, our best professional work. So we work primarily with UX professionals, folks in big tech, but we have a lot of folks involved in our community from other industries as well. And my background is in counseling and therapy, but I made a career switch into UX and big tech about 6 or 7-ish years ago now. Time means nothing. And I'm just super excited to have this this webinar and to have this really awesome conversation with Jor-El. So I'll allow Jor-El to introduce himself.
Yeah, happy Friday, everyone. My name is Jor-El. I am a licensed therapist. I'm the co-founder of a company called Viva Wellness, and we're based in Brooklyn, New York. We're a mental health and wellness company. So what we do is we provide individual therapy, couples therapy, family sessions when that comes up. And we also offer resources on our website. There's a podcast, social media, we share information. And yeah, we're really all about trying to make sure that people have access to, therapy and mental health services, but also for people who aren't direct customers or clients, being able to have access to resources to help them better their mental health, take care of themselves, and often navigate the complex systems that we find ourselves in. And I think that's how Vivianne and I found each other. And yeah, we're excited to have this conversation with you and for you, and we're looking forward to what comes of it, for sure.
Yes, yes. And Jor-El and I also know each other because we're creating an online and cohort experience called Healing Conversations. And this course and experience gets deeper into some of the topics that we're talking about, like today, like moral injury. And I think really from both of our experiences, my experience in corporate, Jor-El's experience as a therapist, we realize and see a lot of people who are unnecessarily suffering in the workplace. And who are navigating life unhealed. And so we both just have a heart and a passion to help people step more into what does it look like and mean to flourish instead of just survive. And so that's really the core of what we're about. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about moral injury, recognizing it, understanding it, but then also what are practical ways to heal from it. And so I guess just so we're all on the same page, let's start with, I think it might just be helpful to talk about like, what is like moral injury? What is morality even? And because I think, especially within UX and tech, there's a lot of conversations about ethics. And so really quickly, I remember like hearing a quote the other day where it defined, ethics are the rules of the game and your morals determine whether you follow them.
Oh, interesting.
I love that framing. And
Yeah.
so from there, I want to, I guess, just quickly define like what moral injury is. So at its simplest level, moral injury is the psychological and emotional harm that we experience when we are in environments or situations that violate our values. When we talk about moral injury, we're referring to damage done to someone's conscience or moral compass within the workplace. So moral injury can come from actions that the person themselves perpetuates or situations that they have experienced or situations in which they have failed to prevent specific activities from taking place that go against their own beliefs. And so this general concept tends to cover like psychological, social, cultural, and I would even say spiritual aspects of trauma. And when I'm talking about spirituality, I'm talking about the things that ground us and give us purpose and meaning. So when a moral injury does occur, it can often result in profound emotional guilt and shame for the victim. And in other instances, it can also induce feelings of great anger, betrayal, disbelief, disgust, and other sorts of moral disorientation. So in short, moral injury is the term used to highlight the harm caused to individuals when their personal moral codes are dismissed and they go against their values during their work-life experience. Jor-El works a lot with a variety of different people in different situations. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you could maybe like just share with us some insight that you've been able to glean from working with professionals in corporate settings and their relationships with moral injury and injury events.
Yeah. I think I'd first want to back up just a bit and honor, and I think part of the impetus of our course is to say, like, we're actually talking about really impactful things,
Yeah,
right? It's like moral injury is some concept, right? And a theory that we're talking about, but there are very real implications. And I guess I want to give a little bit of space for people to take a beat to acknowledge that, these are the things that feel harmful and challenging about navigating spaces, right?
yeah,
Where someone does something or says something, or you feel when you say or do something, or feel compelled to say or do something that goes against your personal values. That's actually like what you're coming up against is psychic pain.
yeah,
And I think that's why it's so important for us to talk about it. And I think that it's worth acknowledging how big that can feel, even though it might happen in these moments that are seemingly very quote unquote small. They're like 30-second situations where, or someone makes a passing comment, and it's like, yeah, it's just that moment, but it's also really reaching something core in you that is troubling and can be
yeah,
very disruptive. And so I guess I just wanted to start off with that. Um,
yes,
yeah, I mean, I think specifically in the past couple years, I've been having so many more conversations with clients about like social justice issues in the workplace. I mean, we've seen you've also had some firsthand experience that you've spoken publicly about the shenanigans that are happening in all kinds of workplaces, particularly in
yes,
corporate settings. And it's like, I've definitely had a lot of conversations with clients on from so many different perspectives, right? So working with Black clients or other clients of color who are saying like, yo, like this thing happened. What am I supposed to do here? Like, I feel
hmm
all these things, help,
hmm
right? And then I also have, some, white folks who are working in corporate who generally think of themselves as really like good, helpful, aware people, but are like, oh, I think I missed an opportunity to do something, or I think I said something that was harmful, but that's not actually how I feel and how I believe. Like,
mm,
what happened? Like, help me process and unpack and maybe do better for the future. And
yeah,
so it's really like so much of it has been about unpacking like whatever that visceral response is of like, is it that guilt or shame that you talk about in a response or a non-response, or is it the difficulty of like, how do you do and address these things without risking your entire livelihood,
yes.
which is such a real question for so many people out there.
Yeah, and I feel like with 2020 especially, I feel like 2020 caused people to question and reevaluate the ways that they have been treated in their workplace
Hmm.
environments, or experiences that we have normalized as just, oh, it's just a part of the game, it's just a part of
Hmm.
working in corporate. And the one thing that I mean, silver lining of 2020 for me is I think it caused people to realign themselves to their values. It caused
Yeah.
people's values to change and realize like, hey, like I deserve to be treated better. I'm more aware of harmful things and the way that that's impacting my energy, my emotions, my motivation, my passions. And I think, the concept and the reality of moral injury is, I believe, is going to be at the heart and center of a lot of conversations regarding workplace experiences and how to be more
Hmm.
human centered and holistic.
Yeah.
Because to your point, moral injury affects so many parts of you, like
Hmm.
emotionally, physically, psychologically. And, I think as I think about some of my experiences in corporate America, especially in light of the summer of 2020, when you had a lot of these companies talk about how, their allies, how they care about people and their employees, how they care about diversity and inclusion. And yet, a lot of us from our experiences within these settings see and witness things that speak to another reality.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that in and of itself, I think well, I could be very cynical about it, which I can be a little bit cynical, right? Is that, people just saving face, right? I think
Sure.
there's a lot of that happening, obviously.
Hmm.
But I also think it speaks to how as we're talking about moral injury, even for the people in positions of leadership,
Mm,
right? How the guys or the motivation of capitalism makes them let go of maybe even some of their own foundational values that they hold personally, right?
yeah.
They say that, like, oh, well, it's just work,
Mm,
right? And which it is just work in one sense, but it's also okay, but most people are spending, I don't know, like 30% of their waking hours at work.
hmm.
So then, like, you have to be more conscious about what is this environment subjecting people to, what kind of policies, what kind of conversations are happening, um, and could be negatively impacting the people in your space. Like, you
Hmm.
have to be conscious of that,
Yeah.
because you're dealing with humans. You're not dealing with robots. You're not dealing with artificial intelligence that you can just program to do tasks. You're asking humans who also have their own lives, their own things going on that impact how they show up at work.
Yes.
And we
Yes.
just have to be conscious of that so we can limit the amount of harm and even maybe promote health
Yeah.
in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think part of also being conscious of that is understanding the ways that morally injurious events can happen. So, like
Hmm.
when I think of like a moral injury, I think of that as an event or situation that is perceived by the person experiencing it as a violation of an important value or belief in a high stakes context. So
Mm.
like these violations might be maybe like something that you have done or failed to do. Because I think moral injury can occur both in something happening to you and something that you're witnessing, and maybe we're like
Right.
apathetic in. So I think about, if you are in a situation where you notice that you have a particular colleague who is always being embarrassed by your manager in front of everyone. You know that you have a colleague who is, suffering or experiencing retaliation, and like you're staying silent. And you like believe you're very justice oriented. You believe that
Hmm.
everyone should be treated equal. Like that's a way that moral injury can occur. I think about, something that someone else has done or fails to do to you or for you. Something that you learned about after it had already happened. So I see this a lot, especially when it comes to like office, like gossip, or hey, you
Hmm.
find out that a colleague is really just like talking mad trash about you behind your back, or you were doing a ton of work on this project and you had someone like kind of go behind your back and try and take credit for it. Like these
Hmm.
little like death by like a thousand cuts. Or this could also again be like something that you have like witnessed, whether you are like seeing and hearing how your company is an advocate for people, cares about burnout and stress, but on the inside you are witnessing a very different culture.
Right.
You're experiencing that.
Right. Like, for example, I think one of the things that came up especially a lot last year was talking to a lot of Black clients about just like being so done and spent navigating pretty much everything, especially in the wake of George Floyd, and still being asked to show up and like be creative, be productive, be all these things. And it's like, okay, well, you're continue to see images of people like you who are and the message that you're getting is that like you're not worthy of safety, you're not worthy of protection, that justice isn't for you, etc. Right? And so then had these conversations with clients about, well, needing time, needing more space to process, to take a mental health day. And right, so they might be a part of a company that's like, yay, diversity, inclusion, like we do our best to like make sure everyone is heard. But
Yeah.
then this person goes to a direct manager or supervisor and says like, I need to take a day because I can't be productive today. And they're getting pushback even though they have the time.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And it's like, that is morally injurious, where this person is really saying it's something that's happening to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or to a colleague who is really struggling, but yet they keep getting pushed. They're not being appropriately supported in the workplace from team members or colleagues. And
Yeah.
but you're within an organization or a business that says we care about our people, we try and take care of our people. No, you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, a lot of companies have been able to get away with, especially the past year and a half, of like, we know you're stressed, we know you're tired, but sniff some lavender and get back to work. And I think that
Yeah.
people are realizing, hey, like that's not a sustainable way of living or working. And I just want to highlight, moral pain is not a problem or a sign of weakness or an
Right.
indicator of brokenness, flaw, or fault within you. Like
Right.
experiencing moral pain is a sign of your humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the systems that we work with, and again, I don't know if I want to say being pessimistic. I just think we need to understand a little bit of context here. A lot of these
Mm.
systems weren't designed to prioritize our humanity and to care for us in holistic ways. I think a lot of companies right now, well intentioned, are
Hmm.
trying to retrofit themselves into becoming a more holistically safe and
Hmm.
inclusive environment. It's almost like if you bought a shirt for yourself that was too small, and you can
Mm.
add fabric to it, you can add elastic bands, and you can make it fit, but it'll never really like fit.
Fit.
And
Hmm.
so I just think that that context is important to keep in mind, because then it also creates space for us to talk about gaslighting. So there's a couple comments I'm noticing in the chat or questions. So
Hmm.
like one question is around, do you think workaholism is taken seriously enough as a consequence of moral injury in the workplace? And then someone else also shared another comment about how they were told to be grateful, that they could even talk about DEI topics at work. And so I think gaslighting is something really important to talk about in this moment, because I think it kind of addresses some of those two things. Do I think workaholism is taken seriously enough as a consequence of moral injury in the workplace? No, I don't. And I think that a lot of companies unconsciously and consciously hope that you work more. And
Hmm.
I kind of have this belief, like if companies could work us to death, I think a lot of companies would.
Hmm.
But the way that they kind of keep us in diminishing our needs, our wants, diminishing our belief that we can advocate for ourselves is gaslighting. So I
Hmm.
see gaslighting happen in several different ways. I see it happening in that example of, oh, just be grateful you can even talk about DI topics. Like that for me is it's like probably like the most common form of gaslighting that I see in corporate, especially from older generations who I
Yeah.
understand the context, right?
Right.
Where they were in the beginning of their career, where corporate is very different now. But we have to be careful to not gaslight ourselves, to not tell ourselves stories that then diminish or de-elevate the significant harm of the painful experiences that we're going through in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to listen, as a Black person, someone tells me I need to be grateful for, like, especially in America, to be grateful for breadcrumbs, like we got a problem,
Yeah.
like, because that's also and that's I think the thing about all these things, it's so rooted in this intersection of, like morality, justice, capitalism, racism. These things are coinciding, and right, and people are
Yes.
maintaining the status quo by gaslighting. Like, you should be grateful. Okay, grateful. And what's next? What are you going to
Yes.
do?
Yes.
Right? I am grateful. And what next? What next? What
Yes.
now? Um, I think most of the time people use these sort of dismissive or gaslighting comments to stop the conversation,
Yes.
right? It's an effort to get you to stop for asking for what is humane and necessary circumstances.
Yes, yes, yes. And plus 1,000 to Aaron, diversity, equity, inclusion isn't a topic.
Say that.
Woo! Say it louder. No, and I think
Right.
too, and especially like the way that I see gaslighting and moral injury in the workplace appear the most within DEI is this. A lot of companies consciously, unconsciously teach this belief that as long as you think you're a good person, as long as you think that you are kind
Yeah.
enough, you're an ally. Don't worry about doing any of the personal work. You're an ally. So then when said ally is confronted by someone else about their microaggression, about their racist
Mhm.
comment, about their sexist comment, said ally says, no, no, not me. I'm a good person. Not me.
Mhm.
I'm an ally. Are you sure it's not you?
Mhm.
Are you sure you're not overreacting?
Mhm.
Are you sure you're not taking this too personally? And even within
Mhm.
that moment, like moral injury can occur. And that is another tactic of gaslighting as well.
Yeah, I mean, I will refrain from going deep into like ego territory and all this sort of stuff, but I
Yes.
like Cliff Notes version is like that kind of response, right? Is really, I think it's connected to the idea that many of us are brought up with is that morality, being a good person, is about how you feel about something, right?
Mm,
And I think that that's another part of this whole system that we have to break, because like that's not true. It actually doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter what you think.
hmm.
It actually matters what you do. So
Yes.
whether or not you agree,
Oof.
right? It's the impact is really about what you choose to do. And I've talked about this in the context of racism before. I love, not love, I'm being facetious, like an unabashed racist, right? Like talk your stuff, right? Like be you, I don't like black people, great, right? So you can say that all day, I don't care. But what you're not going to do is you're not going to enact policies that limit my human or personhood. You are not going to actively harm, physically harm, psychologically harm a black person because you don't like them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so it really is about what you do and what the action is. And I think people really are committed to this idea of morality. It's like, I feel like I'm a good person, right? But like, and that is morality. But when we're talking about existing with other people, morality is what you actually choose to do. And I think the question, the
Yes.
idea that comes up for me with people is, okay, do you have the integrity to act in the ways that you see yourself as moral?
Mm,
Because you can be moral all day, but if you're not acting with integrity, if your
mm,
morality is not lined up with your actions, then your morality is for naught.
yes. Come on. Absolutely. And man, there's a lot of really great questions that are coming into the
Yeah,
Q&A, and we have some folks that pre-submitted some, but
yeah,
so I think let's shift a little bit
yeah.
toward healing. Um,
Hmm.
I guess I'm curious, like from your experience working with professionals in corporate settings, what have been some of the biggest barriers that get in the way of people healing and moving forward from moral injury?
I think probably the most common thing that I see is that people are trying to heal within a broken space, within
Mm,
a broken circumstance.
mm,
And one of the things that I really try and convey to people, and obviously there are some pragmatic issues here, but
mhm,
what I try and convey to people is that you can't expect different results from a circumstance that keeps showing you that they don't value X, Y, and Z, right? If there's movement, right? If there's change, if there's adjustment, no matter how slow, right? Maybe that's a sign to continue to invest and say, like, maybe I could heal some ways as this organization moves forward. But if you're coming up against, just hard boundaries, no adjustment, no flexibility, no movement, guess what? You can't heal there.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Because you're continuing to experience injury day after day.
Yes.
So maybe you could
Yes.
heal from this one moment, but now you have another moment. Now you have three more moments
Yes.
that you're having to recover from, and that's all net negative.
Yes. Yes.
And so I think it's about like really assessing like, well, how is there actual movement? Can I heal here, like within the atmosphere I'm in, or can I only heal a limited amount given the circumstance that I find myself continuously in?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, and I feel like there's a spectrum of removing yourself from environments that are causing continuous injury and harm to your emotional and psychological well-being. There's the far right of like just leave that company, leave corporate America and don't come back. And then there's also, and again, like I just want to be like super clear that I don't think the only answer to healing is like leaving corporate America, starting your own business, and like
Agreed.
saying F the system. But
Agreed.
I think if you are within the system, and again, part of this is like a level of discernment. Like for some
Mhm.
folks, you need to switch teams. You need to get away from that manager, that one colleague, whatever it is. And if you're in a big
Mhm.
enough organization, it's a lot easier to do that. If you're working at,
Sure.
Google or Twitter or Salesforce, whatever it is.
Mhm.
For some of you, like you actually need to like leave like that company and just go
Right.
to a different one. And of course, yes, every company has their issues. Now that we've again gotten that out of the way, there are healthier environments with healthier people. And
Yeah.
I think it's about a level of discernment and figuring out what do you need in that moment. And to your point of being pragmatic, you got to think about your family, you got to think about your kids, whatever it may be. But I always I don't know, like I get a lot of messages, a lot of questions around like how do I better handle like the like abusive environments. And for me, I always think about like if you had a friend who was like, "Hey, I'm in this relationship with this person and I feel like my values are always being violated. I feel like I can't fully show up in front of this person. I feel like if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to be retaliated against." We would be telling our friend, like, get out of that relationship, like, put boundaries, like, run. But I think when it comes to corporate, I think when it comes to work, we're like, how do I better tolerate the abuse? How do I better stay in the midst of the toxicity? And I think
Right.
especially with 2020, I think a lot of folks are starting to challenge that. And one, demand accountability from these corporations, but two, learn how to advocate for themselves and being willing to take that risk to choose, courage over comfort to prioritize their
Mhm.
well-being.
Yeah, and I would just add like one. I think that your relationship example is perfect, because I think one, people also have to understand that we have a relationship with work. It is also a relationship.
Yes.
um, and so putting it in that framework is actually really helpful,
Mhm.
because again, it's like, if even if it's not like technically abusive, right, you were kind of using the example of an abusive relationship where you're like, no, get out, like you have to find safety. There
Mhm.
are other things, like in more average relationships, that are problems that you choose to stay and work through, right? And
Yes.
it's the same kind of thing with the relationship with your workplace, is that, again, do you have some signs that, even maybe albeit messily, people are open or trying to make some changes, or they're open to having a task force on certain policies or certain initiatives, or maybe that is, that does afford you some space to say, I think I can stick here, I can
Yeah.
make some adjustments, right? And I think I can try a little bit more. um, but I think if we're talking about the difference between like coping and healing, right, is that you cannot heal in an environment that is toxic. That's
Mm.
counterintuitive to healing. You can cope, right? And so one of the things I've worked with clients is
Mm,
I can help you cope. I can
yes.
give you the tools to like not completely lose your stuff every day, to not like want to punch your manager in the face, to not, I
uh,
can give you tools to calm, but that's not healing,
yeah.
right? That's the band-aid,
Yes.
right? That's the band-aid when what you really need is surgery,
Mm,
right? But right now, maybe you can't have surgery. I get that. So we're gonna cope in the meantime.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Woo! Goodness. All right. We have a lot of questions that we're gonna try and jump into. We might like teeter a little bit over the 45 minutes, but we'll see. We'll see what we can get through. I guess so. One of the first questions that we got is and let me see if I can drop this in the chat so you can follow
Mm.
along. One of the first questions that we got was, what steps can people take to forgive themselves for putting down the fight when they've had enough? And I'll share like my quick thoughts first, and then would love to hear from Jor-El. I think it's important that we take a moment to break down like what forgiveness is, what forgiveness means. And I was recently reading that the meaning of the word forgive is derived from like an old English origin, which defines forgive as to give away completely the desire to punish. And if we're working from this angle, the question then becomes, what steps can people take to stop punishing themselves
Mhm.
for insert the situation that is triggering shame or guilt? So feeling like they gave up, or feeling like they could have done more and should have said something, or should have taken some sort of stand. And so we often think we deserve punishment in these moments because punishment's true purpose is correction. So for me,
Mhm.
part of moving towards forgiving yourself means first getting really clear on what I think needs to be corrected, and then countering it with the belief that correction is about what I need to do now in this moment to return back to the values that I feel like I neglected.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly helpful distinction.
Mm-hmm.
I think you broke down. I mean, I didn't know the origin of forgiveness. I think that's a great tidbit too. Um, yeah, I think the thing I want people to really understand is that, again, we are consistently existing in we're consistently being injured, and you are
Yeah.
human, right? Therefore, it's going to take its toll. We can't be present to everything at every moment. So it is incumbent upon ourselves, it is incumbent upon us to give ourselves compassion for the moments in which we falter and recommit ourselves to our values, just as you said.
Yes. Yeah, and the next question, I mean, I'm getting kind of like several variations of this, so I won't be able to like
Mhm.
type it in the chat. But basically, the question is, I have experienced a toxic work environment. I've experienced a traumatic workplace experience, and now I'm in a new role, or now I'm in a new position, or now I have left, and I'm having trouble overcoming this and getting back to the place that I once was. What do I do? What's next? How do I heal from this? How do
Yeah,
I cope with this?
yeah. I mean, I think that really speaks to the issue of healing, right? You're in a new situation, you're out of the abuse, right? You're safer now. Um, I, uh, I'm not, I guess I kind of am a therapy evangelist. But like that's the time,
Yeah.
right? It's any time that you are wanting to move forward and you feel like you can't do that alone, right? If you feel like you don't have the tools or the skills to like actually be okay in this new environment or thrive in this new environment that actually maybe objectively is healthier, then what that's really saying to me is that, like, my goodness, you have been traumatized by a place that you worked. First and foremost, as a therapist, I say, I am sorry that you had that experience. You don't deserve that.
Yes.
And two, let's create a plan together to help you find healing so that you get to move forward with a sense of peace.
Yes.
And I think that's largely just individual, about like what specific issues were you like still having trouble getting over or processing, what kind of skills do you need in order to be even more successful in this new place, right? I think that's a largely an individual conversation. So I think that therapy is like the best place for that kind of healing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And I think about a common psychological intervention that's used in therapy is called ACT, or
Mm,
like acceptance and commitment therapy. And really at the core of this is the use of acceptance and mindfulness strategies and commitment and behavior change strategies. So
yeah.
ACT encourages people to embrace their thoughts and feelings rather than fighting or feeling guilty or ashamed because of them or for them. And so,
Hmm.
if we're starting here, I think it's important to know and understand that, to Jor-El's point, action needs to be built into your recovery and healing plan. So,
Yep.
I think I'll take a swing at this by answering this in two parts. And I'm going to borrow some language from a humanity-centered member by the name of Robin Counts. I think to overcome this, there needs to be a commitment to I work and we
Hmm.
work. So when I'm thinking about I work, like that individual work, I'm thinking about three
Hmm.
things. One is I think people need to get really clear on who they are outside of what they can produce. I
Yeah.
think a lot of times corporate America will try to get you to conflate the two, try and get you to wrap up your identity, your worth, your value in work and how they're evaluating your performance. And I think getting clear and understanding who you are outside of what you can produce can help to create some boundaries and a little bit of distance between interpreting maybe like feedback or an experience that you had and how what it says about you as a person.
Hmm.
um, the second thing is I think we need to start to understand the ways that corporate can exploit our insecurities and childhood and adulthood trauma. Like
Hmm.
I definitely have a point of view of like, I think like the way that a lot of systems are designed within corporate is like they will exploit your struggles with validation. They will exploit your struggles with finding and understanding like where your value comes from. Or understanding like, validation, what does that mean for you and how does that come up to you? And so being really clear on understanding the ways that you are triggered. This is the third thing. What triggers you? What are the shame-based messages that you tell yourself in those moments? Is really helpful to, again, start some of this healing work and understanding um, healing and coping work and understanding like how to start to move forward and kind of like divorce some of what has happened to you to what does that say about you now. And then the second thing, super quick, is we work. So when I'm thinking about we work, like I think a lot of folks that I talk to are suffering in silence because they believe that healing must be a solo journey when in reality it should be a shared one. This kind of like pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality. And I think in doing so, shame and silence will cause our pain and suffering to fester.
Hmm.
Brene Brown, researcher and author on topics related to vulnerability, shame, and human connection and stuff. She
Yep.
talks about how shame only needs three things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. But it's the presence of empathy that creates a hostile environment for shame. So when I'm thinking about WeWork, I'm thinking about the need for community, to hear other stories, to know that you're not alone. And I think that's played a huge part, even with why we designed healing conversations, this cohort experience, to be done in community and to teach people how to walk with each other in difficult situations and circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Another question. When I'm gonna again have you start this off, Joel. When does it stop hurting? how
Mm.
how do you reestablish trust, and what words, like what language can you start to use in order to better advocate for yourself and ask for what you need?
Yeah, that's those are all like big questions.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm like, all right, let me try and make sense of it in a way that can be taken away in like a minute or two. I so when I think about emotional pain and I think about trauma, um, I think the bad news that I often tell people about healing is that healing doesn't mean that it goes away.
Yeah.
Healing means that it shrinks.
Mm,
So what any kind of emotional pain that we're talking about, we have this like self-preservation tendency in all of us, and as a therapist, it's in everyone. Stop the pain. I'm like,
yeah,
yes, but also you can't entirely do that, right?
yeah,
But the goal is to really, really shrink it to where it feels more tolerable, where it doesn't disrupt other things,
yeah,
right? It doesn't get in the way. It's not a barrier moving forward. And that's really what I think like healing is about.
yeah,
You can still have those moments where you feel the pangs of that hurt as it like reverberates in your life in different situations or whatever, but that doesn't mean you haven't healed. It just means that like there's still hurt. There might always be hurt there,
yeah,
but you don't have to judge that. You don't have to do anything else with it. Sometimes there's a bit that just stays with you. Let's just make sure that it's not disruptive.
yes.
um and I forgot the other part of the question.
The other part was like, what words can you use to ask for what you need to better advocate for yourself? I think especially this question is important, Jor-El, for folks who maybe have been in an environment where they were experiencing moral injury often and a lot,
Yeah.
and then they now have left and they're in this new environment. What advice do you have around language, um, words that can be used to better ask and advocate for what you need, especially after experiencing moral injury?
Yeah. The way I talk about this often is like thinking about assertive communication, which I say is hard, HARD. So it's honest, appropriate, respectful, and direct,
Mm,
right? So that might look like, um, and always sort of starting with I statements. So you talk about that I work. I think this is very much the I work, right? Of saying like, I think it would be really helpful if I had X when Y happens, and this it will lead to Z benefit, right? That or I think that we could better align ourselves with the values that we espouse if we do X. How can we make that happen? I think sort of like using that loose framework kind of coupled with the way that you normally talk and like your own verbiage and like how you express yourself. I think if you infuse that with that framework, I think that that's the way that you can really be assertive, but also still be respectful, still be appropriate and professional, while still like while you're still asking to be seen and treated as a human.
mm,
Um, and I think that that's if it's that HARD, I think that that's the way to go about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love that. I appreciate that. And uh, I want to be aware of time.
Yeah.
I guess if there's one more question, because we both have experienced moral injury in our own
Mhm.
ways. Maybe I think it might be helpful if like we could just share ways that we like things that have worked for us and like kind of like where we've been at in our journey.
Mm,
I'll start first. So I feel like especially being a black woman in corporate, just being a black woman in America, like moral injury is like constant. And so for me, things have been helpful is honestly, especially when I was like in corporate, was developing friendships with people who like weren't in my industry. Because when you are constantly at work talking about these things, like sometimes like the greatest gift to me was to talk to my friends who had no idea, like all the trash fire stuff that was happening in my role, in my industry, and just to give a little bit more space between, again, who I am and like versus what I can produce. So that's something that's been really helpful for me. Therapy has been super helpful for me. I think also too, just better boundaries. Like there's a book that I really love. My laptop is sitting on it right now. It's called Set Boundaries and Find Peace by Nedra Tawwab. So when we send out this recording, we'll also send out some links to like resources. So don't worry about Googling that. But I think like having better boundaries has been huge for me. So I think I have gotten really clear too on the belief, and I enacted this belief that I don't exist for people's consumption. That is with work, that is on social media and things I post on LinkedIn. Like that is something that has given me a lot of like emotional and like mental relief. So that way I'm not always having these conversations or putting myself in situations where I'm more likely to experience moral injury. And I think also too, like I've learned how to rest. I just have learned how to rest. Like I don't view rest as a means for me to be more productive. I view rest as just a means just to like be present and take care of me. So resting is proactive. It's intentional. And so resting for me, and it'll change and it'll look different for you as well as it does for me. And it'll look different across different seasons. But sometimes resting means me and Jor-El were talking about how we have no weekend plans and we're super excited and we're not trying to plan anything. Resting for me is, making a dope playlist of like lately been to like early 2000s R&B and hip hop and like reggaeton and just like riding my bike along the lake. Rest looks like not jumping into that one like LinkedIn conversation, that one Twitter conversation that is going to rob you of your peace that day. It's, not choosing violence on social media. Rest is, I took 2.5 months of leave from corporate. I took short-term disability because I needed it. And rest looked like advocating and saying no to work. So those are some of the things that I think have played a huge part in my healing and my continued healing. Curious, like what has worked for you and what's top of mind when it comes to moral injury?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of overlap of the things that help. And so I won't repeat all of what you said, but just kind of add some specific points. I think one of the ways for me was like that was part of the inception for my business. I come from the nonprofit world in New York City, which is like, my goodness, corporate America, but also nonprofit work.
Yeah.
So, that's part of why like me and my business partner created Viva Wellness, because it was about saying like, all right, we need to be able to do this our way without having to always have these conversations about equity, inclusion, about flexibility and services and all this sort of stuff. So that was in large part it. But yeah, I think in addition to the things you said, I think also meditation's a big thing for me, and mindfulness more generally. It's like so helpful for me to find healing. I actually find that restorative and healing and not just like a coping strategy for me personally. I also, one of the things I've been more like connected to recently is play. As I know you were talking about bike, and I saw some comments come in, and like I've been like gaming recently. I'm not a gamer.
Interesting.
Right. And so just like being able to allow myself to play more, play games, play with my dog more, be silly in those ways. It's just so freeing to be able to let go of, like you said, all those associations of performance or productivity or whatever, and embrace like these things about ourselves that are just genuine and light and bright. Making space for that, I think, is incredibly healing.
Yeah. And I'll also add to that, like with play, I think also like dreaming. Like when I say dreaming, I'm thinking like having fun, thinking about like the what ifs, like, I recently did this activity with a friend where we started to like create like a bucket list of just like things that we want to do. And it was just fun to like dream. And I think part of why that's also important is because it trains you and like your brain to imagine another situation, to
Possibility.
to learn how to be hopeful and to
Mm-hmm.
not be caught into despair. So
Mm-hmm.
dreaming is so important, and it's fun. I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to wrap up there because I want to be respectful of time. I know we've gone a little bit
Yeah.
over, but I just appreciate y'all being on this call. I
Yeah.
appreciate the vulnerability too within the chat. Um, and you know, Jor-El and I, again, like we dive a lot deeper into this, into our new cohort experience called Healing Conversations. If that's something that you're interested in, curious about learning more about, I've dropped the link into the chat. But until then, our hope and encouragement is that you would continue to choose you. We hope that you're able to find some rest or joy this weekend. We hope that you feel empowered to say no. And yeah, we just hope you have a good weekend.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you everyone for showing up. And thank
Yes,
yourselves for showing up for yourselves.
absolutely. We'll be sharing a recording of this probably tomorrow morning, and we'll share some other links and resources to continue to help and support you on your journey. So take care, stay safe, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.